Through his entire adult life, Dr. Booth was focused on healing others, physically, emotionally, spiritually. At the same time, he was always busy making this a better place to live.
Oh, once I lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm. When they called me down to Dixie, it caused me much alarm. To hoe the cane and cotton, I right away must go. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know.
Welcome to Not Forgotten, a weekly podcast sharing the stories of a place known as Utah's Dixie, and brought to you by the Doc Booth Foundation. Through stories as universal as they are personal, this podcast is dedicated to the memory of legendary family physician Dr. Craig Booth and to defining, preserving, and perpetuating the spirit of Dixie embodied in his life and work.
Hi, I'm Lyman Hafen, host of the Not Forgotten podcast. For more than 40 years, I've been writing and publishing with the intent of connecting landscape and story in the American Southwest. I believe the words spoken by a character in a story by Barry Lopez. Everything is held together by stories, he said. That is all that is holding us together, stories and compassion. Dr. Craig Booth was a man of stories and compassion. His personal story is one of the many that have made Utah's Dixie what it is, and his compassion is at the heart of that elusive entity we call the Dixie Spirit. Today, as an introduction to this podcast, I'll share some of my own encounters with Doc Booth, thoughts I recorded soon after his passing in June of 2021. There could be no better way to launch this series of stories than with the man who embodied every particle you can isolate in the atomic structure of the element known as the Dixie Spirit. Every year, during those dazzling days of mid-September, you could count on it. We were 2 long weeks into the school year. The scorching air of summer was just beginning to wane under the new slant of the sun. Then the towering trucks rumbled into town, and a battalion of boys and girls swept through the neighborhood as fast as they could pedal, yelling, "The bulls are here!" Swanee Kirby's hulking stock trucks growled onto the rodeo grounds and lurched to a stop at the stock pens on the north side of the Lions-Dixie Sun Bowl. Before the first trailer gate was lifted, the fences were already lined with wide-eyed girls and boys from every neighborhood in town. A sigh of delight and terror rose from our chests as the bulls rumbled out of the trailer, one by one, briskets waggling, snot blowing, throats gurgling as they trotted heavily down the ramp to their pens. And there they stood, like alien monsters in the golden afternoon, shifting from side to side, twitching their massive humps, pitching their high-racked horns, claiming their territory as the sunlight glinted in their eyes, the size of cue balls. It was an annual rite of fall for a kid growing up in 1960s St. George. In recent years, I've learned it was the same for St. George kids growing up in the 1950s. It all came clear to me a few years ago when I received a text out of the blue on a mid-September day. It simply said, in all caps, "The bulls are here." I didn't recognize the number, but I heeded the call. With no bike at hand, I jumped in the car and drove straight to the Sun Bowl. I walked up to the stock pen fence and stood near a man whose hands gripped the top rail. He was looking into the dusty pens and smiling at the massive animals shuffling in the dirt. He turned his face to me and smiled even wider and said, "I figured you'd come." I knew him immediately. He was Dr. Craig Booth, someone I'd admired all my life. Over the next few minutes, we reminisced about our common memories, mostly about the joy of rodeo week when we were little boys in St. George. His memories were from the 1950s, mine from the 60s. Those were transcendent minutes as we shared almost identical feelings about the sheer ecstasy of rodeo week in our quiet little town. Both of us had treasured those memories all our lives, and there we stood in the same place we stood as kids. The next year, I got another mid-September text from Craig Booth. This time, we agreed to meet before daylight at Denny's on the south end of town. We could have breakfast, get to the Sun Bowl as the sun broke over the East Black Ridge, have a good look at the bulls, and get to work on time. Breakfast was a literal and figurative grand slam that morning. We shared boyhood memories and compared notes on the larger-than-life people we'd both known. I was amazed at Doc Booth's breadth of experience and knowledge and the endless number of people he knew and places he'd been and things he'd experienced. He was just as interested in my stories, and all our stories seemed to intersect in uncanny ways. At one point, I asked him about the merciless nature of pancreatic cancer. I had two friends who'd recently suffered it. He knew them both. One had died within a year of diagnosis, as most victims do. The other had miraculously survived. Doc Booth asked me for my pen. He switched into a seriously focused mode, unfolded a napkin, and drew the outline of a pancreas. He had not been their doctor, but he knew the details of both cases, and on his napkin he showed me in 30 seconds where the cancer had occurred in each man's pancreas, all the while sketching away like a kid with crayons. He showed me how the one cancer was inoperable and how the other was successfully, though also miraculously, removed. We talked about our mutual love of the Arizona Strip that morning. He wanted to know more about our family ranch in Nevada, and I chided him about how he had single-handedly introduced to the world the iconic hike in Zion known as the Subway. In the early 1980s, before anyone knew about the route, Craig Booth began taking his friends and neighbors through the magical narrows of the left fork of North Creek off the Kolob Terrace of Zion. He made the hike scores of times, sharing the route with hundreds and hundreds of fellow hikers. It went viral from there, making it necessary over the last several decades for the National Park Service to limit access through a permit system. When we got to the Sun Bowl that morning, we were suddenly little boys again. We were as mesmerized by the bulls in the 21st century as we'd been in the 20th. Looking out over the Sun Bowl, Craig recalled his days playing high school football there. We both laughed as we remembered setting up on the line of scrimmage on the weekend following the rodeo. It always took a week or two to finally clear off all the little piles of fertilizer the horses and bulls had left on the turf. Craig shared his memory of a tragedy that haunted him all his life. During warm-ups before a football game in Milford on October 27, 1961, his teammate and friend, Lyman Hafen, collapsed on the field. Craig worked shoulder to shoulder with Coach Walt Brooks to revive him, but it was a hopeless task. There was no hospital to take him to. They got him to a doctor's office, but it was too late. Wendell had suffered a heart attack. He died there on the field. That's when Craig Booth began to imagine becoming a doctor, which several years later he did, but not before graduating from Dixie High School and attending Dixie Junior College and serving a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the North Central States Mission. He married Maureen, the girl he'd adored since junior high school, before entering medical school at the University of Utah, where he was student body president. He could have gone anywhere and made his mark as a great doctor, but he chose to return home to St. George at a time when you could count the number of doctors in town on one hand. What he and his dear, talented wife, Maureen, achieved here over the next 40-plus years cannot be captured in words. I can think of no one who touched more lives individually or impacted a community more broadly than Craig Booth. He was president of the Utah State Medical Association from 1987 to 89. He was Utah's Doctor of the Year in 1994. He was medical director of the original Dixie Regional Medical Center and helped design the new campus of the medical center in St. George. He and Maureen served as mission leaders of the Arizona Phoenix mission from 2002 to 2005. After that, he worked in the Regional Rehab Center. Ever the healer, he worked in the wound clinic for several years, then the Doctors Free Clinic, then the Booth Wellness Center at Dixie State University. Through his entire adult life, Dr. Booth was focused on healing others, physically, emotionally, spiritually. At the same time, he was always busy making this a better place to live. He was one of the most ardent fans and generous supporters of Dixie High School and Dixie College sports. 2 years before he died, he was named Utah High School Athletic Fan of the Year. He never missed a game. He was a founding member of the St. George Exchange Club, a longtime member of the St. George Water and Power Board, a temple worker at the St. George Temple, and the designer and funder of the magnificent flagpole that stands on the Red Hill at the head of Main Street, where a glorious American flag waves above the city. I've only mentioned a few of Craig's deeds. Countless more, like the hundreds and hundreds of babies he delivered, wounds he healed, and lives he saved, are known only to those who were the beneficiaries of his competence and compassion. For the next few years after our first encounter at the Sun Bowl stock pens, Craig texted to let me know the bulls had arrived. We'd meet for breakfast before daylight, and as the sun rose, we were looking through the fence at the bulls and catching up on shared memories of the town we both love. He won't be there this year. He left us, sadly, just a few years ago. The shock of his passing still hovers over old St. George. He is genuinely missed and has left a gaping void, wide and deep, the kind of wound only his Christ-like compassion and skilled care could heal. For those of us who knew him, we turn to the faith in Christ we shared with him for peace, comfort, healing, and for some kind of answer. I plan to be there this year. I'll walk up to the fence and look through the rails at the bulls on those hallowed grounds where every September since 1934, our community has gathered to revel in the pageantry of rodeo, where every year we try to hold on to something that seems to be slowly slipping through our fingers. After I've taken a good look at the great and terrible beasts, pawing the dirt with their huge hooves, I'll turn and look up toward the Red Hill. There, at the head of Main Street, I'll see the magnificent flag waving over our hometown. I am so blessed today to be sitting here in the studio with Maureen Booth, the wife of Dr. Craig Booth, and his beautiful daughter, Brittany Fonsbeck. And we're just kind of reminiscing today and remembering Craig and remembering his character, remembering stories, remembering the awesome and wonderful things about him. And Maureen, I would just love to have you share some thoughts about your husband.
Okay. Well, in one of those comments that you made, that you were talking about the bulls, you said that he wanted to come back to St. George. When we went to California on his internship, there were several doctors there that wanted him to stay in California. And he was doing a residency in surgery. And Dr. Fossen and Dr. Staley called him on the phone and said, "We really, really need you in St. George." And so he decided he didn't want to be in the big city. He wanted to go home. He loved Dixie. He loved St. George. And so we came home. But he had signed the Berry plan for the military. And once they found out he was out of school, he was given active duty papers. And he was supposed to go to Texas to a military place to serve as a doctor. And Ralph Atkin and Tony Allen, attorneys in town, figured out a way to get him out of that so that he could stay in St. George, which was a physician-needy area. And he was so glad to be able to stay in St. George and do what he did over the years. He loved the people of St. George.
Was this during the Vietnam era?
Yes. He had to sign papers when he went into medical school that he would have to serve when he got through.
Well, we are sure blessed as a community that he was able to come back here.
Well, I was glad we came back here, too.
Brittany, share with us something about your dad. I'm sure your heart is just full of all kinds of things, but just share with us what's burning in your heart today.
You talked about how much just he loved this community and the people, and he legitimately loved everyone. He knew everything about everyone, or he knew who everyone was. We would go to a ball game, and I would say, "Who's this?" And he could tell me their life history and their family tree and everybody. And we would go to a ball game or somewhere, and we'd go to Paula's, and we'd be like, "Where's Dad?" And we would call it campaigning. We're like, he's campaigning. He's over shaking hands with everybody. He's talking, he's laughing, he's joking with everybody. It's because he just truly loved the people. They were his family to him as well. And that's just who he was.
That's awesome.
He campaigned a lot, let me tell you. No matter where we went, he campaigned.
But never ran for
office.
That's great. Well, I would imagine in some ways he was like the de facto mayor of St. George, wouldn't you say?
I tried to talk him into running for mayor once, but he said, no, they get too much complaining, and he didn't want to hear the complaints.
Maureen, you mostly grew up here.
Yes.
You're a Dixie girl. Tell us about your childhood and then maybe bring that into how you met Craig and how you're...
Well, that is a good story. I moved here when I was 7 years old. In 1954, and you can figure out how old I am now. And at that time, the town was small, and you knew everybody in town. There was one stake. I knew who Craig Booth was. I knew who everybody was after a while. And when I was in the 7th grade, he was the police chief at Woodward, and he was the one that would ask people in each grade to be a police officer.
Well, he was the student police chief.
Yes, he was the police chief at Woodward Junior High School. And he asked me as a 7th grader to be on his police force. I guess he thought I was cute. I don't know. But we would go write tickets for kids that chewed gum at school, and that's how they made money for the library at the school. You had to pay a quarter to get rid of your ticket. So we would meet once a week in the old Woodward gym. And one time I went in the gym, and one of the boys in the upper grades started chasing me. And when Craig came in, I yelled at him, "I'm being chased by this kid." And he said, "You leave her alone." And then I thought he was a good guy after that. And so he went on his mission. I knew who he was. And when he came home, I was at Dixie Junior College, and he came home and saw me in a class and said, "Oh, Maureen Haslam, I remember you. You were on my police force." And then a few months later, he started dating me. And then once we started dating, we ended up getting married.
And the result of that is an amazing family.
Yes.
Share. Name your children and share.
Okay, I have the oldest son is Berkeley. My second son is Derek. My third son is Corbin. my fourth kid was Brittany, and I was so excited to get a girl, I decided to have another one, and his name's Kevin. But all of my boys have the same middle name, Craig. He named his kids Craig, the middle name, and I never heard of that until I met Ross Hurst. And all of Ross Hurst's kids are J number. The beginning is J, but the middle name's Ross. And they were best friends, so you can see why they named their kids that way.
Brittany, tell us about growing up in this family, one girl among all these boys, and tell us about growing up in Dixie. What does that mean to you?
It's an amazing place. I wouldn't have wanted anywhere else. Growing up with four brothers I didn't know anything different, but I loved it. I love my brothers. They're just amazing, amazing men. Growing up with my dad was really fun because he did know everybody. It was interesting because we would have a lot of house guests would come. Not really guests, I guess his patients would come. So a lot of times we'd be eating dinner and he would take them into the den or into the other room. And that was just normal for us. He would get phone calls all the time. And some were quite comical and others were very serious. And you knew, and he had doctor mode. He would answer the phone and then all of a sudden he would just get real serious. And the way he would talk, you knew it was a patient or something, or it was a hospital. The hospital called all the time. There's a new baby, and if we didn't get the message to him, we were in some serious trouble. So we learned to take messages and let him know that he had a new baby. And probably unique to my childhood is because he did deliver a lot of babies, and he was a family physician multiple times, and my friends can attest to this. He would take us to dinner, always usually Paula's. We would go to Paula's, have dinner, and then he would say, I have a new baby. Do you want to go watch a circumcision? And he would take my girlfriends down and we would watch a circumcision. I don't think anybody else did that growing up. So that was just normal to me. That was just how it worked with him. And he didn't care. He loved it. He was there to teach these girls.
Well, I think so from very early on, you knew you had a unique father. Let me ask you, Maureen, you moved here when you were 7. So was there a time when you realized or discovered that there's something really special about this place?
Yes, because when I moved here as a 7-year-old, I left 2 sets of grandparents, all my cousins, all my friends, and I begged my dad to take me back to Salt Lake. I hated St. George.
Did you grow up in Salt Lake?
I grew up.
Your earliest years were in Salt Lake?
Yes, my early years were in Salt Lake. And I lived across the street from the Sun Bowl where the rodeos were. I remember the day I remember several days. Number one, when there was a flood down Flood Street, because I lived on Flood Street, and the water came down the street, and we all went out and sat in it. And I thought, this is really cool. And then when the rodeo left and spring came, there were all these big weeds growing in the bullpens, and we would go over to the Sun Bowl and play for hours, playing in those weeds. They were just weeds, but we played like we were horses and cows and bulls, and then we would get on the whatever those levers were that would let the bull come out, and one of us would stand on there and we'd just play for hours doing that. And I remember thinking about that time in my life, maybe this isn't such a bad place after all. And then when I went in 2nd grade, I had an incident. I had Faye Picklesheimer as my teacher, and a boy stole something from me and ruined it. It was something that my mother lent me so that I wouldn't ruin it, and he ruined it for me. And I was crying, and she comforted me, and I thought, this is okay. And after that, I've loved St. George. I wouldn't ever leave it, even now. So it's always been a great place. The one thing I want to say about St. George, I was thinking about this the other day. When there was a football game or a basketball game at Dixie College or Dixie Junior College, either one, or a play at the college or anything like that, the whole town went. It wasn't just, a few people would go. The whole town went. You couldn't have a wedding on the night of one of those events because nobody would go. They were all at the ball game. And that just doesn't happen in every place. St. George was such a close-knit family, so to speak, and you knew your neighbor. You didn't know addresses. You just knew who you lived by, and that's all there was. You just understood where everybody lived and who they were, and you loved them.
Brittany, you grew up on the Red Hill in an awesome neighborhood. Can you reminisce a little bit about your childhood there and what it meant to be a Dixie girl?
Oh, I loved where I grew up, above Diagonal. I mean, anybody could tell you stories about Diagonal. Our family jokes about Diagonal. And we were above Diagonal, and we loved it. We were up on the Sugarloaf, and somebody that's truly from St. George when they call it the Sugarloaf, because a lot of people don't realize that the Dixie's called the Sugarloaf. And we would play up on the hill, and we would go down to Bluff Street Park all the time, and you just never worried. You just were with your friends, and you knew you had to be home by dinner time, and it was just it was magical. It really was.
This concept or idea of a Dixie Spirit, when did you start to become aware of that?
I think we went to every football game. I mean, one of my brothers played football, but we were always at the ball games. Didn't matter, basketball, football. And I remember I don't know, maybe 10, and they would play at the Hanson Stadium. And I remember, running around, playing with friends, but I was up in the stands, and, there's so many people. And you would look around and you knew everybody. And I just remember looking out thinking, this is really, really fun. This is such a great place. And at 10 years old, you're this young kid. And I think from then I kind of paid attention to the stories, and I paid attention to the people. And, people would always talk about the red sand gets in your shoes and it doesn't leave. And I always thought, what does that mean? And then I realized, yeah, it's just that love for this place. It really doesn't leave you. There's just something so great about it.
You're raising your family in Utah, but quite a ways from St. George. How do you reconcile that?
My youngest daughter actually just yesterday said to me, we come down quite often, and they have friends because we're up north, and they're like, oh, we're going to St. George. And she's always like, we go to St. George all the time. She's like, I should have a toothbrush that stays in St. George because we're here so much. And they love it. They love it. They know there's something special about this place. And I talk about the people here all the time. We run into people all the time. They laugh and they make fun of me because I always run into somebody I went to high school with, or this was grandma's friend, or this was grandpa's friend, or whoever it is. And my daughter just graduated from Dixie College and loved it. And she came here because to her, it just felt like home. And she just knew she needed.
Maureen, those of us who knew Craig, who knew Doc Booth, the first thing we think about is the funny stories and just the humor, his humor. Could you share some examples of that or some of your
I certainly
memories?
can. One thing that everybody says to me, they come up and tell me funny stories about Craig that sometimes I don't know. But when he graduated from medical school, and it was a big deal for us. We were poor, and his parents had been poor, and for him to graduate from medical school and be a doctor was a big deal. And we'd had graduation. His parents were there. My parents were there. Everybody was there. And it was an exhausting day. I'd had my first son. And as we got in bed that night, I said, well, good night, dear. And there was this big pause. And then he said, it's Dr. Dear to you. And I thought, oh, dear, I'm in trouble. But that's one thing I miss about him is his humor. And then he'd come home from the clinic, and he would say, they have this great toilet paper at the clinic. Could you buy that? And I said, well, you've got to find out what it is. And he said, okay, and then he never did. So one day in the mail, I get a letter, and it's addressed to me in his handwriting. And I'm thinking, wow, I wonder what this is. So I open it up, and it's one square of toilet paper. And on it he had written, roses are red, so is cinnamon gum. This toilet paper feels good on my bum. And I didn't ever find out what kind of paper it was. But he was just always doing things like that. He would write me little notes about, the kids would leave a note on the drain board. I'm at Whitehead's or I'm at Betsy's or something, and he'd write, I'm on the toilet. I mean, it was just constant stuff like that. And so that's what I really miss about him, because he had a total sense of humor. And I asked him one day, I said, why do you have such a good sense of humor? And he said, when I was blessed by my dad, he gave me a sense of humor. And it was really true.
Maureen, you mentioned because the base of all humor is seriousness. And I mean, Craig did grow up in their family was not well-to-do.
No.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how that affected who he became?
His family, his mother and dad were very uneducated. His dad went to the 8th grade. He lost his mother and his father, and he had to take care of his brothers and sisters, and so he couldn't go to school. And they always stressed education just because they weren't. And all of his brothers got an education. And I think the Wendell Hafen thing at Milford was probably the thing that bothered him the most about he couldn't help him. And he thought that would help, it would help other people as well as it would have helped Wendell if he had known. He also had an incident where he was on the street in a big city, and a woman collapsed in front of him and actually died, and he couldn't do anything for her either because he wasn't a doctor. And I think things like that bothered him. He was smart as a whip. He knew he could do the work, and so he just decided that that's what he wanted to do. And he really wanted to come and be the doctor at Dixie and in St. George because he just loved everybody.
But let's talk about that flag. Debbie and I were driving up Main Street yesterday, and we just looked up there, and it is just perfectly right there at the top of Main Street, and it is so inspiring. How did that come to be?
He had this idea. Well, number one, he didn't serve in the military because he got out, but he was always patriotic. We have a flag in Pine Valley where we have a cabin. We have a flag at our house in St. George. And so one day, I don't know what prompted him, but he figured out mathematically where to put that flag so that it was perfectly aligned with Main Street, perfectly aligned for the Red Hill place, and you can see it perfectly from 500 North. So he actually figured it out, and he told me one day he was going to put a flag up there, and I said, well, that's interesting. How much is that going to cost? And he gave me a figure, which was wrong. And he got permission from the city, and they were ready to do it, and they started and realized that if the flag was at half staff, it would hit the power lines that were up by the water tank. And he just about cried, and so he talked the city into lowering those lines so that the flag could be there, which I love the city for that because they're so happy to have that flag. And they made it work, and the day he got the flag and the pole was ready, he himself went up there to put it up, and I could see the pole from the front of my house. And I sat there and I just started to cry because it was so beautiful. I had no idea it was going to be that beautiful. And when he finally told me how much it cost, I wasn't quite so happy. He knew it was going to be good. And I think that's the legacy he has left that's very visible for our town.
Well, there's so much to his legacy, but that's one thing that we can all focus to. And I know that I think about Doc Booth every day because I see that flag every day.
People tell me all the time, oh, we love that flag, we love that flag. And I think there's a lot of people that don't know he was the one that did it because he wanted to do it. The city gave him a key to the gate. He was going to lower the flag if there was things for it to be lowered for. And he was going to take care of that flag. And then the city decided maybe that wasn't a good idea to have somebody have that key because the water tank's there. And so the city took it over. And when the first flag that we put up was ruined, they put up a really small flag, and it just wasn't the same. So I called Mayor Randall, and I said, Michelle, I will pay for a flag if you'll just make it a big one, because it needed to be the big one. And she says, no, the city's going to do it from now on. And I love the city for that.
And it's such a great example of this whole Dixie Spirit thing, where something like that needs to be done, but it's not necessarily going to be done by the city or not going to be done by a specific entity, but one person or a group of people come together and say, this is what we really need. And they bring it together and they find the funding to do it. And it becomes something for the public good. And then the public entity, like the city, can take it from there.
Right.
I mean, the Sun Bowl is kind of the same thing. And a lot of other things that relating to the university and other aspects where an individual like Doc Booth or a group of people came together and said, here's what we really need to do here. And then it happens. And I know that's not specifically unique to St. George or to southern Utah, but it is something that's very special
He decided
here.
that he grew up in what they called Sandtown because they didn't have paved roads up where we lived up on the east side of town.
Uh-huh.
And there was the Bluff Street Park. And he said, that needs to be the Sandtown Park. And he went to the city and he got all the people that he knew who grew up in Sandtown, and they all en masse went to the city and said, we'd like to change this name. And they did, because it meant something to the people. And that's one thing I like about St. George still. They still have the wishes of the people in mind when they do things.
And it's also wonderful, and I think that Doc Booth's example with the flag helps to spur this, but the city is continuing to, I know they're doing an interpretive trail around the Sugarloaf now that will have information about Dixie and why this place is called Dixie, and that rock, that Dixie rock, is the Sugarloaf and why it's called the Sugarloaf, and all of those kinds of things that tie together. And I don't know if we would be there right now if it weren't for Craig and people like him that have bridged that period that from where we were to where we are now.
Well, and I think that's the power of the Dixie Spirit, right? And so many people have moved here that didn't grow up here, and they always say there's something special about this place. There's something different, and it is that Dixie Spirit, right? And that's one of the biggest reasons why we want to do this podcast, is so people can learn those stories and learn why this place is such a special place, because it really is.
And maybe you could go on from there, Brittany, and share with us more about the Doc Booth Foundation, what it is, how it came to be, and what it's here for.
After my dad died, I wanted to do something. You know, we've talked about the great influence he had on this community, and I knew something needed to be done. And I first thought, we can just do one scholarship, maybe, you know, in honor of his name. And I approached my mom, and she's like, yeah, I'll. And then one day I just thought, no, it's got to be bigger than that. He's so much bigger than just one scholarship. And so I got help from our family friend, Sean Steele, and he helped me to launch this foundation. And our number one thing is scholarships. My dad is a massive proponent on education and just how important that is. And, you know, he always encouraged us. I mean, we just knew growing up, you went to college. Though you didn't have an option, right? We just knew we would go. And we want to give that opportunity to kids to be able to do that. And I just think he would just love that. And then we would also like to focus on some mental health and just other needs that are in the community, because he is the St. George community. He is this Dixie Spirit. That's just who he was. And so we want to continue that. And just what a great opportunity to help people, because he just loved people and all he wanted to do was help.
Tell us how the foundation works and how people can become connected.
The best way would be obviously our website, docboothfoundation.org. Right now we're taking applications for scholarships for high school kids. And, we are just launching, it's a little sparse at the moment. But as we do things, we just had our kickoff in April. As we have events and as we get to, do the projects that we're looking forward to, we will have all that information on our website.
Maureen, can you share your thoughts about the Doc Booth Foundation?
Well, Brittany, bless her little heart, she just did this basically on her own. She asked me to help. She asked her brothers to help. But she has done most of the work here, and it's just amazing what she's done and the vision that she had. And I'm old, and I said, I don't think I have the energy to do some of this, but it has turned out so well, and I think Craig would be thrilled because he was so supportive of the schools. He had every school, every paraphernalia that they gave you when you gave them money from every school in the county, and he supported them. He went to probably every game there ever was. The more we got into it, the more excited we got. And then after our event, it was so successful that we realized that people want to give. And there's not really a place to give for education as much as there used to be. The Dixie Foundation that the college used to have is no more. And we want these kids to apply and get these scholarships to go wherever they want. They don't have to necessarily go here, but it's local kids that we want to help. And I think it's great. And the DO school in Ivans is a big supporter of us, and we are willing to give scholarships to one of their students, especially if they agree to go to a smaller town and become a doctor there like Craig did here. And they're very interested in finding that person.
And it strikes me that this is something that even a boy named Craig Booth could have benefited from in 1960, 59, or whatever that year was, a little bit of extra help to go from where he was to what he would become.
He never got a scholarship, so that's one of the reasons this is important.
And this is an opportunity for us through that Dixie Spirit to bless the lives of young people who are moving forward in their life. So you go to docboothfoundation.org and you can find out everything you need to know there and how you can contribute, how you can connect with the foundation, and how you can make a difference in somebody's lives. I just think right now there are young people out there who are going to have the same kind of impact that Doc Booth had, and this foundation will help make that possible.
And we take donations all year long. Mm-hmm. We do have these events, but we do take, at the end of the year, people are always looking at places to give a tax-free donation for tax purposes. So we're asking for anybody who wants to give anything. That's
wonderful. Maureen and Brittany, thank you. This has been so wonderful to get to visit with you today. And what you are doing is so beautiful and awesome, and I appreciate the chance to spend a few minutes with you.
Thank you, Lyman.
Yeah, Lyman, thank you. We're so excited for this podcast. It had to be you. And again, the whole point of this podcast is just to get people to remember and realize how special this place is, and just to fill that Dixie Spirit, because it's incredible.
The Doc Booth Foundation is dedicated to empowering individuals through educational opportunities and promoting mental health advocacy. Through scholarships and funding for important community needs, the foundation perpetuates the can-do spirit of the founders of this community, using the lessons of the past to chart the course for a better future. Not Forgotten is produced by Ricky Valadez and made possible by the generous support of St. George Area Zag Stores, industry-leading tech support and accessories. Lyman Hafen's books can be found at lymanhafen.com.
Once I lived in Cottonwood and owned a little farm. When they called me down to Dixie, it caused me much alarm. To hoe the cane and cotton, I right away must go. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know. We came to Dixie, and we called it home. Oh, in Dixie, we've lived and grown. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know. The hot winds whirl around me and take away my breath. I've had the chills and fever till I'm nearly shook to death. All earthly tribulations are but a moment here. And oh, if I prove faithful, a righteous crown I'll wear. We came to Dixie, and we called it home. Oh, in Dixie, we've lived and grown. But the reason why they sent me, I'm sure I do not know. I hope that there's a heaven with rivers pure and clean. But I know that